Boardroom Bound, Episode 43, How to Build a Successful Nonprofit Boardroom with Judith Cronin.
I really do believe that the people that we have on our board have so much to offer that I'm challenged to keep them challenged, and I consider it a very important responsibility of mine to make sure their time is well spent.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give new and aspiring directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. In today's show, we're speaking with Judith Cronin, and she is the executive director of the Greater Beverly YMCA, which is a $13.5 million nonprofit organization serving 11,000 facility members and 700 childcare members each day. Her job includes management of 600 staff in the areas of programs, membership, childcare, and management of 5 facilities. And this Y is part of what they call the North Shore of the YMCA, and it is one of the 30 largest YMCAs in the country. So this is a massive organization. It's one I have a lot of personal interest in because I'm on the board there, and I'm excited to share Judith with you because she is dynamic. She has done an amazing job building this organization and has lots of best practice approaches, systems, processes that she uses with her board. I want to take a behind-the-scenes peek, show you what that's like for everyone who's thinking about working in a nonprofit. Here's an example of what it could, perhaps should, look like in an organization, and many are somewhere on the spectrum heading towards that. So you'll hear what Judith is looking for, how to present yourself as a candidate, and what the process and approach and system might be for you to join an organization and what you would do. So we want to help people who are thinking, this is what I would like to do, to understand whether that is correct, and if it is correct, how to go about getting that board seat. So much great information from a fun person that I really enjoy spending time with. I can't wait to share that with you on the show today. Judith Cronin, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Delighted to have you in the studio today. That's always a treat for me. Most people have to be on the phone. And for me, this is just a great translation. Even last night, we were in the Beverly YMCA board meeting together. So we're just taking all of those experiences we've had there. And for you, it's sort of the best practices you've brought to that. And I think that's what I'm excited to share with our listeners today. But not everybody knows the relationship that we have in a history, so I would love to just back up and tell a little bit of your story. If you want to talk about maybe where your career began and how you got to where you are today, and then we'll unpack that and what it looks like for our audience.
Sure, happy to. Well, out of college, I was a finance major, so my first position was in high tech. I worked for a company that maybe nobody remembers, which is Digital Equipment Corporation, but Ken Olsen has a Gordon connection.
That's right. We've got a building here named after him.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm sure some Gordon students would recognize that name, but it was bought out by Compaq and then bought out by Hewlett-Packard. So I was there for 18 years in financial controllership, and I was fortunate enough to be able to schedule a departure from work at the same time that the company was getting bought out because my children were little, so I spent some time at home, and that was really a pleasure to be able to do that when my kids were young. But what I did do during that time period is I got into local politics because of my husband telling me I was constantly complaining about what was happening locally. And he said, well, if you're not willing to do something about it, then I don't want to listen to you complaining about it.
Now, Massachusetts, people take their politics very seriously.
Very seriously. So I said, okay, well, then I guess I'm going to have to do something about it. So I ran for school committee first, and I was the president of the school committee. I was there for 4 years, and then I was on the city council for 4 years. So I went directly into the city council. And during that time, that 8-year time frame, I spent a lot of time at the YMCA with my kids. And what I was fortunate to be able to do was to begin working there in fitness part-time as well. Got to know the staff, got to know the current CEO, who was just the fitness director at the time. He hired me into the YMCA, and I shared a little bit about my background, and he would offer me job every once in a while, and I really didn't want to do full-time at that point in time. So I was just happy in fitness for part-time, and it ended up being 12 years of my time just part-time on the Y. He did ask me to join the YMCA Board of Directors, which I did, only for a couple of years. And then as the kids got older, I needed to go back to my career because college is expensive. So I went back into finance and decided at that time that my community involvement was more important to me than my original business career. I just didn't have the same interest in a for-profit type of career and in finance especially. So I was fortunate enough to be able to get a phone call one day when the executive director position at the Y was open. It was still Chris Lavasco, thankfully, that was still at the Y, remembered my background and asked me to come interview for the position. So that's how I'm here 9 years later as the executive director of the Y, and I'm thrilled. I think the business background was really important to be successful in this job, so I was happy to be able to have that, but it's more as a foundation in the decision-making I do now rather than the primary work that I do. So I was thankful to have it, but I'm really happy to be in the position I'm in.
And just for context for the audience, so we are talking just north of Boston. I'll call it like Greater Boston North for people who are elsewhere on the map. And this is collectively the YMCA of the North Shore, which is a multi-location facility, one of the 30 largest in the country. Judith runs the largest within that, so it's about a $13.5 million enterprise, so significant. And what I've seen has been very impressed by what you have done, what you've established over the 9 years in terms of professionalism. We'll just talk about the board in detail here. And it'll be a lot of learning curve for our audience today of thinking, if you want to go down and work in a nonprofit, what does that look like to bring your best self there? How do you help them? How do you coach them? How do you guide them? Maybe they're somewhere in their learning curve. And maybe we can start by looking back from the 9 years ago, because it probably wasn't what it was, what you've gotten to be now. Talk about, because I think this will be helpful for our audience to understand, if you're going to be working with someone who's running a nonprofit, what do they think about things? How do they see things? Can you talk about what it was like when you came in and you saw the board you had and you thought, I probably have a different vision, and how do I implement it?
Well, being part of the board gave me an interesting perspective before I was actually in the executive director role. As part of the board, I felt that there was more of an opportunity for me to use the skills that I had to help the organization, help the executive director. I don't know whether there was enough of a challenge put on the board to sort of rise to the occasion to help. So that was that was what I walked away with.
Were they more fundraising at that point originally?
We did fundraising always. Well, when you're in a nonprofit, basically that's what you do most of the time. But it was a little bit less, I guess, going after certain strategic initiatives, a little bit less organized about taking calculated risks, and not necessarily using the expertise that was around the table as much as I thought could have happened. So I took that away from my experience on the board. So when I got into the position, the first thing that I wanted to do was to ask people if they wanted to stay. What I learned is some people need a door to walk through to leave. They don't want to volunteer to leave because they feel like they would let people down. But if you give them a path to feel comfortable that they've decided that maybe it's not the right thing for them, or they don't have the time to be able to put into it, I want to be able to at least interview every single person and get that understanding. And surprisingly, most people were opting out when I had those initial interviews. Perhaps it was because they didn't feel as engaged. Some people felt that they couldn't put the time into it, so they sort of pulled back. I had a lot of very interesting conversations. So I think about after 15 interviews, there was probably 4 people that remained, and the rest were seats that I had to fill.
And just to be clear, the translation across that we'll talk about later is term limits. And commitment of the board is you sign up for a 3-year term and you can have up to 2 more extensions on that. I'm guessing there was nothing like that in place at that time.
In fact, when I joined the Y, the bylaws were just established. So they were pretty specific with relation to board governance in those bylaws. So I think they were loosely held before, but they went through a very specific process. So the term limits came up. So it was 3 consecutive 3-year terms. And what we didn't have is a cap on the number of seats that we could have on our board. But what I've learned is in order to keep the group engaged, the number 23, 24 feels good. A little bit less than that. Sometimes with schedule conflicts, you don't get enough brains in the room and too many to engage 30 plus people in an experience where they feel very challenged. I think is a little bit overwhelming for the executive director as well. So because the executive director, I consider the role as sort of like a jack of all trades, and board management is where I spend a lot of my time, because I really do believe that the people that we have on our board have so much to offer that I'm challenged to keep them challenged, and I consider it a very important responsibility of mine to make sure their time is well spent. So planning, making sure subcommittee work is beneficial and robust and accomplishes things. And when you have 6 subcommittees as well as a full board, it's a lot of prep work, but it's good work because it's sort of gently, I always think of it as a gentle hand on my back pushing me forward, because I have to continually prepare to keep other people engaged. So I'm always advancing the agenda because I know that there's another meeting coming up where I need people to feel engaged. So
and I would just give color to our audience, because the rigor with which you run that now is not typical of the nonprofits I've been on before. Needing a strong voice and a strong direction, whether that's the board chair or the non-executive director or the executive director, whatever it might be, someone's got to be driving that, and you do that very well. You had to put that in place, right? So you had to come up with the different structures and the subcommittees and how it would run. For some of our audience, they're envisioning, I definitely want to be involved in a nonprofit. This is what I want to do. And we'll do a deep dive into the governance in a minute and how you find the people and how you pick them and the board matrix. But if someone's in the background thinking, great, I want to be involved, there's an initial part probably of someone saying, what's the right fit for me in terms of passion and location, all that stuff. Let's translate that across to the why. As we're looking for board members, we were talking about the meeting last night. We're always looking for new board members. Give some guidance for someone to try and figure out how you find a fit to start down that discussion.
The way we typically are able to start talking to someone about a board position is an interest in the mission of what we do. And I think that that's really very, very important for a prospective board member to think about before they join an organization, because the work of a nonprofit is not a lot of resources and a lot of work, a lot of work to be done. And always the list is never ending. So with a why, we assess the needs in the community and we put together programs and services to address those needs. So it's an ongoing discussion. And if an individual who's interested in joining us, the mission of community service and serving those that are less disadvantaged in ways that maybe are important in their mind or maybe don't seem as important in their mind. I think it's very, very critical to understand what the mission is and what the organization's trying to accomplish. Because if that interest isn't there, then all of the work that gets done is not going to keep them engaged. So understanding the mission, doing a little bit of research on the organization, and understanding how the board works and the other people that are on that board. What I've learned just in my experience is chemistry of the board as an entity. It's much bigger than the sum of its parts. I've seen boards that don't work well together in that it's almost like this unwritten chemistry that can occur. I consider my board like lightning in a bottle. It's just a group of people that enjoy each other's company, but are also very bright, bring a lot to the table, have a lot of diverse skills, and it's almost perfect. And that it doesn't happen all the time. I was fortunate enough to be in politics before I came to the board, so I knew a lot of people, and I knew who I wanted to go after because I saw them in the community, outside of their profession, giving of their time and ways in which made a difference. So I knew who I wanted and was able to get meetings and start interviewing and talking with people, and then getting recommendations from others. So if you're thinking about it, my suggestion is find out who is on it. And if you happen to have a connection to somebody who's on it, start asking questions. Because the best board members that we have are those that not only apply their skills and assertively request to help in some way, but also enjoy being with the people that are on the board too. We have a lot of people that are sort of extroverts, I would call, rather than introverts, but that's not a requirement. But that seems to work for a lot of folks because they like to be social with each other as well. So I go back to your original question, which says, what should people be thinking of? And I would start with the mission, and then I would really connect very quickly with who the other board members are and understanding whether you have a connection to somebody, a LinkedIn connection with somebody, and just start to find out what it's like to be part of that group.
And that all makes sense. And let's fast forward from what we talked about before, of finding it and building it, to where you are now. And now it's a well-oiled machine. We were hearing about it last night, about the governance process and the structure. So imagine someone's going to come through our process now. It is an incredible sausage machine that someone is going through. Can you walk us through the steps and how it works? Because I think it's a great best practice to share with others.
Sure, happy to. We start with, we've just done this recently actually, was a competency model for the board. We consider the board as an entity of itself and should, through its membership, possess a set of skills so that the work of the board can support the executive director across multiple disciplines. So the first thing that we did, as an aside, before we put it into the process, was figuring out what those competencies are. What are we looking for in a board to be able to be the best in service to the organization. So we have this list of competencies. So then we set our best sources, our current board members. They know what the experience is. They know what it takes to be successful. So we're going to look to them to be our first line to submit recommendations for board members. So we have an application form that what we call is an initial screen from other board members, which has the competency model in it, addresses the applicant's fit on the competency model, and then, leadership qualities and your typical questions when you're looking for someone to join a nonprofit board. We put all of those into a process at the beginning of the calendar year. And then end up going through a screening process, a second screening process with the board governance committee. So once the application's from the board members, and we have decided that if a board member is coming forward with somebody, that they have vetted that individual out. Some people never get to the application process because once the board member has had a discussion with them, they've decided, maybe it's not the right fit. But once it gets to the application, we're trusting enough to say, okay, this person is worth our time to at least talk to. So then the governance committee talks to that individual and says, asks various questions, understands, the depth of understanding of this individual of our organization.
And just to be clear, it was a very relaxed, detailed conversation for me. It was down at the local pub while we had an adult beverage, so it wasn't a bad experience.
Yeah, and it's not meant to be threatening in any way. In fact, the board governance members really enjoy getting to meet all sorts of different people in the community, and once that happens, there's that second interview. All the feedback comes back to the governance committee, and it's sort of put up against what the competency needs are of the organization or of the board going forward. We have board members roll off, so we have competencies leave the board, and we want to continue to backfill because we have a nice balance of what we're looking for now. So if someone's a really great candidate but they're not filling the need that we have, we keep them on a list. We may engage them in subcommittee work, or we may say, right now, that's not going to happen. We're going to reevaluate next year. But if someone fits in the competency model and is someone we really want to get on the board, we put them on one of our subcommittees for at least 6 months into the board year so they can get a feel for the work, get a feel for the other people that are on the board, and also can decide whether it's a good fit for them, and we can decide if they're a good fit for us. I thought
that was a brilliant part of the process.
Yeah, because some people have decided, boy, this is a lot of work. I don't necessarily think I want to do this.
And on some boards, you just write a check or you just show up occasionally if you want to. That's not the way this group is run. This is more like a professional organization.
Exactly. And part of the interview process is around philanthropy, because as a nonprofit, that is one of our major roles is fundraising. So we ask our board members to have the Y be one of their major charities that they give to, and that doesn't ever seem to be a problem. And giving is very personal, and I always believe that. Most people ask me what the number is, and so there is a number, but some people go very much over that number, and some people go under that number. So on average, the number is maintained by the board because the board basically is leadership giving for the donor base. So if we are asking people in the community to support the Y, we have to be able to say our board members 100% level support our Y, because we also ask our employees to support our Y. And if our volunteers and leaders of our board aren't supporting, then it's very hard to go and ask our employees. So our employees are like very, very generous as well. So that's the process. As people are on the subcommittee, they will come up for a vote on the board throughout the year. Some people accelerate through that process very quickly because they've shown themselves to be a very good contributor. They have acknowledged that it's the right thing for them. We see that it's the right thing for us. The need is great for their skills, and so we'll vote them in. Some people have spent 2 years on subcommittees because might not have been the right time for them, but they like the subcommittee work. Might not have been the right time for us, so we've kept them connected. And then their name is brought forward when the governance committee believes it is. And it's really just a cycle from there, because I was fortunate enough to bring on so many 9 years ago. And then from my first year, my second year, my third year, I kept bringing on people. But now it's going to be 9 years, 10 years, and 11 years, and 12 years from me bringing on people, which they're all leaving. So that's why it's very, very important that we're bringing 3 and 4 people on a year, which is a lot of work. You need about 12 candidates to get 3 that are really going to match your needs. So that's why we're continuing to ask the board. And then I use my contacts within the community just to go out and seek and talk to people. But and on very few occasions, people come to us. That really typically isn't what I see a lot of. People don't come in and say, I want to join your board. Most people say, I want to volunteer for the Y. And that sometimes is code language for I'm interested in the board, but I'm not really sure. So we put them in a volunteer position. And lots of people have done that, and they find that that's their niche. They don't want to be involved in any policies of the Y. They want to be able to be in the direct service role and sort of rolling their sleeves up and raking leaves at the elderly, or handing out food, or collecting clothes, and doing that kind of work. So that's our process.
And as we think about that, that's an incredible system that you've built. How do you think about your board? Is it an extension of your brain in some ways, that you're bringing ideas for them to kick around and assess and do some research on and kick back to you? Is it the people that you're taking these? I think my final baked plans, I just want to double check these make sense. How do you think about how you use it?
Well, that's a really good question, because it does take a lot of planning. I do spend a lot of my time planning what each of the subcommittees should achieve in the course of a board year. So that's what I'm starting to do now, for instance, for September, because I'd like to be able to put forward a set of goals for each committee when they start, so they feel that there's a direction. But I also know the members so well now, because they've been with me for so long, that it's sort of an ongoing conversation. They offer a lot of information back to me. A lot of them are members, so they're experiencing what we're offering daily, or at least 3 or 4 times a week, and they have, they're acutely aware of what's needed and what's being discussed and what's being complained about and what's being requested. So all of that information comes back to me. I consider it more of an ongoing conversation, and the topics of the subcommittees are very discrete. They're very different from each other. So it really is the work of the executive director broken into subcommittees. Everything that I do it finds its way into a subcommittee. So I find the benefit of putting 6 brains on it instead of just my brain on it. And so I also have a very high level of respect for the time of my board members, because I know that when they're in front of me, they're thinking about the YMCA. But when they go off to their real job and other parts of their life, it might not be the first thing on their mind. So that's why being planful and being able to get the topics advanced, because the people are in the room and you're able to get their opinions and assign them some work. That's why planning for those meetings are really, really important. So it is my brain entirely, all the subcommittees together, and any one little subcommittee is a piece of work that is trying to get accomplished.
And by little piece of work, sometimes they are massive.
They're
so,
big.
for example, sitting on the strategic subcommittee, which I am, I love that we're planning out the next 5-year strategy. Mm-hmm. And there's a major change going on in the world between some of the low-end, say, Blink-type places and the very, very high-end, uber-expensive gyms, and trying to figure out where we fit in between. So it's real work that's going on for a real organization. It does a lot of good. And there is a sweet spot between, you talked about at the beginning of, it's a lean organization because it's a nonprofit. So you've got all of these people with different backgrounds, experience from the business world, from education, from legal to finance, et cetera, and how you use those in the right way and make them fit. And we talked about culture is the word I'll use before, about wanting it to make sure that everyone's a fit together. And for some people, you're coming from maybe a tough-edged business world, and now you're going to be working in a nonprofit, which some of us will think is a little more touchy-feely. How do you think about the culture and make sure someone's going to be a right fit to bring in? Because this will be helpful for our audience thinking, how do I know I'm a right fit for an organization?
That's a really interesting question, because most of our people are from for-profit that are on a nonprofit board. And when I speak with them, because I'm the final interview when we go through the process, when I speak to them, I have the advantage of having a perspective of being in a for-profit, going to a nonprofit. So I'm pretty blunt with them about the difference, and I make sure I explain it, because it can be frustrating, because the pace is much slower at times and feels a little bit more chaotic. It's never a straight line from point A to point B. There's always like a few jags and turns in it. So I try to give them the perspective that the work is amazing. I always say that it took me 50 years to find the right job, and I really feel like I'm in the right job for me, but it's not for everyone, because people who are...
well, I can vouch it's the right job for you. You're doing an amazing job there.
Thank you. Some people would get frustrated by it, though, because it feels like it's slow. For instance, we added a new expansion and a new facility on our campus recently, and it took us 6 years to do it. And we giggle about it now. We're thrilled that it's done, but it was like moving a noodle uphill, because it's a balance of trying to do the right thing with trying to secure the resources to try to balance a portfolio of 7 YMCAs in our association, and dedicating resources to the right one at the right time is a challenge for the CEO. So the pace might be frustrating to some, but those that worked with me on that, I think, got a sense of enormous accomplishment and feel that they have left a legacy in the community, which a nonprofit will present that opportunity to anyone who's interested in it. Your kids are watching. That's what I always say to my board members when they're working really hard and they have to leave their kids at night to come and do the work that we do. And I say, but your kids are watching. You just tell them what you're doing. Make sure they know. Because my kids are now in their late 20s and 30, and they get it now. When they were 9 and 10 and 12, when I was going to do community work, they were kind of frustrated because I was always out in the evening. But the legacy that you can leave for your kids and in your community is so significant, and that's what I think keeps a lot of them going, because they can now look at a new facility that they had a part of and tell their family that, boy, that I put some work in, and this is what we were able to give back to the community. So it's great.
And I imagine for a lot of the audience who are listening to this thinking, I was planning to go down the nonprofit route, that's probably exactly what they're hearing of. I can use my time and my talents to make a difference somewhere. And if you were just to sum it up and give sort of one piece of advice, the most important thing, if someone who's thinking, great, I've never done this before, I want to be on a board of a nonprofit, if you had to pick out just one thing that you would say you must do, this is what you should work on, what would you recommend?
I would advise them to aggressively go after what they think is important for their community, to be a voice, not to wait for the work to come to them, but to initiate some of the work. Some of the best things that we've done have been ideas that bubbled up out of the board, just in general discussion or in a subcommittee or something that they've learned. Don't be afraid to have your voice, because in a nonprofit environment whose mission is to serve the community, everything that's brought forward to us has merit. Everything needs to be considered. Everything should be weighed as to the importance of and the impact that can be had if we went and did that. So every idea is important, and don't feel that you should be limited in your own lane, because some of our best ideas have been people just sort of brainstorming and saying, geez, I don't know about this, but why don't we go in this direction? Or why don't we spend some time studying this? This is what I understand that needs to be done, but maybe I'm right or maybe I'm wrong, but can we spend some time looking at it? So really trust your instincts, because you're a member of the community. When you're dedicating time to a nonprofit, the work is going to affect you and your family and your neighbors and your friends in the long run. So what your inner voice and instincts are telling you is a reflection of a piece of the community. So trust it and offer it as input, and then make sure that it's not forgotten. Because the executive director, and this role is kind of a crazy role. You're just kind of doing everything all the time for everyone. And sometimes the executive director will say that's a great idea, and then it'll kind of float away somewhere because they're doing something else. I would stick with it until you feel that it's been vetted and it's been either advanced or dismissed. Because some of the best ideas have come to a total surprise to me, and was a mild suggestion at the board, but got me thinking, and then it turned into something. So that would be my advice to folks.
Well, I love that. And Judith, it's been a pleasure working with you over the last years. I've come onto the board and seen the way this organization runs. And for me, being part of a great organization like the YMCA that does so much good in the world is just a pleasure, a great way to spend my time and my energy advancing, certainly giving myself more skills and more availability for other opportunities, but also just giving back to the community at the same time. And I imagine there's some people listening going, I want to be with a Y. And there are Ys everywhere, right? So there's lots of opportunities. People might want to follow up, learn more potentially about our own local Y. And if people wanted to follow up with you, what would be the best way that they should contact?
Well, you can go to our website, which is www.northshoreymca.org. And under leadership, you'll see all the executive directors for all 7 Ys. So depending upon what community you live in, you can find your executive director and just reach out. There's always something to be done at YMCA, and we're always looking for folks to offer some of their time to us in a way that can be helpful. And there's always a need for board members, and there's always a need for people to want to commit their time and their talent to helping us advance our mission. So our website is pretty informative as to all of the things that we do. Again, that'll give great background for someone who may be interested in joining YMCA. And YMCAs across the country, there's about 2,700 different YMCAs. There's the same overarching mission, but each is run by its own board of directors. So there really isn't a quote-unquote parent company that we have to answer to. They're really run by their local board of directors, and that's a lot of power that the board has. So it can really shape the way in which the Y serves the community, which is a terrific use of time.
And I guess a little secret as well, if you become a board member, you're probably already a member of the Y. If not, you probably will become a member of the Y. And then when you're traveling, you can go to any of the other Ys.
Exactly.
Right? Nobody seems to know about it, but you're entitled to go to all of them, which is a very cool benefit.
I do have one member that comes in and tells me how many Ys he's visited. So I think he's up to something around 77 Ys. But he'll always go and take a few pictures, show me what it looks like, tell me what he liked about it, tell me what he didn't like about it. And it's always fun to see other Ys in the way in which that they're serving their community, because they're as different as we are as a country. The Ys take the personality of its community, and when we go to national conferences, the people that you meet are so great, and they're running Ys in their own communities, and they could not be more different, but they're the right thing for their community, which is awesome. There is no organization like it. It's something that a lot of people don't understand the depth of the mission of what we do, and serving the community. Some people think we're a gym and a swim facility, and we're so much more than that. So we like to talk about it a lot.
Well, speaking of communities, I think for this community, this was a great case study today to understand the people that you would be talking to find the opportunities at the nonprofits. You're getting a peek behind the curtain of what that perspective would be. And we were delighted to have you on the show today, Judith. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and helping all of us to be boardroom bound.
Thank you. Great to be here.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Judith Cronin. It was great to share with you something that I experience on a regular basis. So being a board member of the YMCA here and seeing this fantastic organization does a lot of good that I get to spend time helping. But not only that, it's a very professionally run organization. Not necessarily always the case with every nonprofit, but this is what they would aspire to be like. So I enjoyed the fact that we were able to give you an insight today in what the process would be to get one of these board seats, how to best present yourself, what it would be like once you're in the board and doing the great work for the organization. Many of our audience are aspiring to be a nonprofit board member, whether that's all they want to do and that's how they want to spend their time, or whether that is an opportunity to move from there to a paid board role. And if that's the case, being on a big name organization like the YMCA, where I get to serve on the strategic committee, is a great way to position yourself. Now remember to head over to podcast.gordon.edu, where you can get links to all the resources that we talked about today. And if you enjoyed this episode of the show, I'd be very grateful if you would open up iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher or wherever you're listening to this. And if you would just very briefly leave a rating and a review, that would help us immensely to share the message about this podcast, because we want to get the word out. I'd also encourage you to subscribe and stay tuned in, because every week we're bringing you great content like this episode. So thanks for joining me on this episode of the show. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.